In a museum dedicated to and filled with eerie artifacts, one stands out as the most terrifying of them all. Her name is Elizabeth, and she's garnered the title of the world's most haunted doll. She's said to be possessed, but by what? That is the real question. Her story is one of unexplained attacks, mysterious phenomena, and a deep-seated hatred. Despite her ordinary, even docile appearance, Elizabeth has left a trail of physical and psychological scars on those who have dared to cross her path. We will be telling her story today, and the truth, well, that's up to you to decide for yourself. I did want to quickly mention that I don't know Lee Steer, Sarah Carter, or their team personally, but having dug into this story and their content, I found them to be genuine in their approach. I emailed Lee, and to my surprise, he messaged me back. So I'd like to thank him not only for permission to cover Elizabeth's story, but for all of the videos and photos used that he's posted, and overall for just being a supportive and nice guy. I think especially with how shady people can be, particularly in this field of work, that when you find genuine folks, you definitely should support them and or support one another. With that being said, check out all of Lee's links, which I will show here and in the description, and subscribe to his YouTube channels especially, and tell him Mystery Archives sent me when you do. Thanks again to the Ghosts of Britain team and personally to Lee. Now, let's get to today's content. The listing wasn't flashy. No dramatic title. No haunting backstory typed in blood red font like so many other so-called cursed objects peddled online. But that was precisely what caught Lee Steers' attention. He had seen hundreds, maybe thousands of haunted dolls for sale in his years as a paranormal investigator and curator of the Haunted Objects Museum in South Yorkshire, England. Most were amateur attempts at cashing in on people's fascination with the supernatural. A few candles, some fake blood, sloppy stories attached. But this one felt different. The doll's photo showed a Victorian-style figure seated stiffly against a neutral background. Her face was pale porcelain. The wedding gown she wore had yellowed with age. The veil was intact, draped over her synthetic auburn curls. Her eyes, however, fixed and glossy, seemed to hold something ancient, even bitter. But what truly set the listing apart was its warning. It was simple, direct, and unsettling. Possessed bridal doll, malevolent energy, men beware. The seller had little to say beyond that, but what was included intrigued Lee. The doll had reportedly passed through multiple owners, all of whom were men. Each had returned her, some within days, citing unexplained injuries, illness, and an overwhelming sense of dread. The seller themselves claimed they had acquired it from someone in Wales, but refused to keep it after experiencing activity that they couldn't explain. Lee knew the signs. He had encountered haunted items before, objects that carried traces of emotion, trauma, or more rarely, what he believed were genuine spiritual attachments. But this doll's behavioral pattern was disturbingly specific. It targeted men. That detail alone made it exceptional, so he placed a bid. The auction ended quickly. Lee watched as the bidding slowly ticked up. Other paranormal collectors must have noticed the listing, but none seemed willing to challenge him too aggressively. The final sale price was £866.66. The number gave him pause. The 666 at the end. a sequence many associate with biblical evil. It was likely a coincidence. But still, in the world of the paranormal, coincidences often take on darker meanings in hindsight. Within a few days, the seller confirmed shipment, and the doll was on her way to the museum. Lee Steer and his partner Sarah Carter had curated the Haunted Objects Museum as both a center of investigation and public education. Unlike tourist-styled haunted attractions, this one was a serious endeavor. A collection of over 60 documented haunted items from across the UK and beyond. Each item came with history, alleged activity, and in many cases, physical or video evidence of manifestations. They had seen furniture that moved without explanation, music boxes that played when untouched, mirrors that refused to reflect. But what they were about to encounter with the doll named Elizabeth would eclipse all of it. They didn't yet know her name. That would come later. At this point, she was simply another item in the catalog. A doll with a warning. The package arrived on a quiet Wednesday morning. Sarah met the courier at the front gate, and the box was surprisingly light for its size. Carefully packed, no strange smells, and no obvious signs of damage. Just a plain cardboard container with fragile scrawled on the side. Inside, surrounded by layers of crinkled paper and bubble wrap, was the doll. Even out of her packaging, she was unassuming. No overt sense of malice, no inexplicable chill in the room. Yet Sarah, who has always trusted her instincts, felt it instantly. To quote her here, "I remember thinking," she later told a reporter, "this one doesn't want to be here." They placed the doll in a freshly prepared display case inside the museum's so-called bridal room, a chamber housing other feminine-themed haunted artifacts, wedding veils, mirrors, and 2 vintage photographs with their own rumored histories. The doll was placed behind a clear case, no identification plaque, no label, just a camera overhead and a motion sensor nearby connected to their internal alarm system. Nothing happened that first night, but by the end of the week, everything would change. The museum was quiet at night. By design, the Haunted Objects Museum didn't allow overnight guests. Though Lee Steer and Sarah Carter had both spent countless evenings doing after-hours investigations within its walls, the building itself, housed in an unassuming structure in South Yorkshire, had rarely produced the kind of activity Hollywood films led people to expect until now. It started small, as most genuine paranormal events do. The fire alarms were the first to misbehave. 3 nights after the doll's arrival, the museum's internal system triggered just after 3 a.m. Lee had just fallen asleep when his phone buzzed with an automated alert. Fire alarm, Zone 4. Zone 4 was the bridal room. He rushed to the location, flashlight in hand, expecting to find a tripped smoke detector or a possible electrical short. But instead, the room was still, untouched, and most importantly, cold. There wasn't a trace of smoke anywhere, no signs of anything being out of place. It was the first time the fire alarm had ever activated without cause, but it wouldn't be the last. Over the next several days, the alarms continued to trip, always in the same room, always between 2 and 4 a.m. No matter the weather, time of week, or number of people present, the pattern was consistent. Lee checked the wiring, replaced the detector, even called an electrician to verify the system's health. Nothing was wrong. Still, the alarms went off. Lee and Sarah kept a meticulous record of their investigations. They began placing digital recorders and motion sensors in the bridal room overnight. They didn't expect much. Paranormal EVPs or electronic voice phenomena are notoriously elusive, but it was a standard part of their process. One morning, Sarah received the audio files from the night before. The recording was mostly silence, punctuated by faint environmental noises. But at 3:17 a.m., the audio spiked. At first, it was just a low hum, like interference from a shortwave radio. But then came the whisper, a low, unmistakable female voice that said, "Get out." Sarah listened to it a dozen times. She played it for Lee, then through software filters. There was no mistaking it. A voice had spoken when no one was in the room. They tried to debunk it. External radio interference, intermodulation, or perhaps it was an equipment malfunction. Well, the recording device was battery-powered, shielded from ambient interference, and had never picked up a voice before. There had been no human presence within 50 feet of the room at the time. It was the first direct communication. The doll had apparently begun to speak. The sixth night after her arrival, Lee conducted a solo walkthrough of the museum. Live streaming to a modest group of his online followers, he moved from room to room, narrating each item's history. When he entered the bridal room, the air was noticeably cooler. Not freezing, but just felt off. He approached the case containing the bridal doll and began explaining the recent disturbances, the alarms, the voice recording, and the doll's curious warning label. Halfway through his sentence, he winced. His hand moved to the back of his neck. He continued speaking, brushing off the sudden discomfort. But within a minute, he excused himself from the stream. His skin felt as if it were burning. Back in the main room, he turned on the overhead lights and checked the mirror. His neck bore a deep red mark, forming a curved, almost sigil-like shape. Sarah arrived shortly after, and upon further inspection, they found some marks across his upper back. 3 fresh scratches, thin, parallel, and precise. There were no nails. There was no contact with any sharp objects, and no one else had touched him. Lee knew what he had experienced. He didn't say it out loud, not right away, but later on camera, he confirmed the obvious. "Something scratched me in that room," he would say. "I've been doing this for over a decade, and that was a first." From that moment forward, the atmosphere in the museum shifted. Staff noticed it. So did visitors. Some reported intense headaches near the bridal room. Others described feelings of dread, particularly men. Sarah herself, though never attacked or touched, remarked how the doll seemed to watch her. And the more male visitors passed through her presence, the more aggressive the activity became. Lee documented each event. The pattern was undeniable. Elizabeth, as she would soon be called, didn't like men. By mid-2024, rumors about the doll had begun to spread beyond the museum's inner circle. Paranormal enthusiasts, skeptics, and curious locals took to social media to discuss the strange activity linked to the recently acquired bridal doll. Lee and Sarah had shared evidence online: fire alarm incidents, the EVP recording, and Lee's own scratches. But it was a live stream on TikTok that brought the world's attention to what many would soon call the world's most haunted doll. The event was meant to be a casual late-night walkthrough, part of a series Lee had been producing to showcase the museum's collection. His live streams had modest success, drawing in thousands of viewers from the UK and beyond. But the bridal room was about to take on a reputation all its own. On a Thursday evening in late June, fellow investigator John Paul Kinney joined Lee and Sarah for a collaborative session. John Paul, a paranormal researcher and content creator, was well known for his rational approach to ghost hunting. He didn't frighten easily. The trio planned a TikTok live session inside the museum, with special attention given to the bridal doll. Viewers tuned in from around the world and watched as John Paul entered the room alone, while Lee and Sarah monitored from outside. The setup was simple. The doll was displayed upright in her case, surrounded by other feminine relics. John Paul addressed the camera calmly, describing the alleged reports of physical attacks, particularly toward men. He was only a few minutes into the stream when something happened. John Paul was mid-sentence when he abruptly paused. His eyes widened, and he reached behind him, gripping his shoulder and the back of his shirt. "What the hell was that?" he said out loud. "Something just grabbed me." He stepped forward, turning to check the room behind him, but it was empty. The doll remained motionless in her case. Viewers flooded the comment section, asking what had happened. Some thought that he was joking, and others immediately believed. "It felt like someone just yanked my shirt," he said to the camera, "right here at the back of my neck." He pulled the shirt forward to show his collar. Moments later, he complained of a sharp stinging sensation near his shoulder blade. The live stream ended shortly after. And later that night, John Paul posted an update video. The area where he had been grabbed now bore a long, thin scratch. Red and fresh, just beneath the neckline of his shirt. He hadn't scratched himself. He hadn't touched any objects, and there had been no one else in the room. It was the first documented attack on camera, and the proof was rather undeniable. The TikTok clip was reposted dozens of times. Other creators stitched the footage into their own videos, offering analysis, commentary, or simply reacting in horror. Paranormal forums picked up the story, a Reddit thread dissecting the moment frame by frame, searching for signs of trickery. Skeptics debated the possibility of static discharge or staged events, but no evidence of deception was ever found. And all the while, more stories began to emerge. Visitors who had been scratched, men who left the museum feeling nauseous or lightheaded, people who had experienced nightmares after visiting the doll. For the first time, the world was paying attention, and the doll, soon to be called Elizabeth, seemed to thrive on it. Sarah and Lee tightened their protocols. Access to the bridal room was limited, especially for male visitors. Warning signs were posted at the entrance. Surveillance equipment was upgraded, and every new incident was carefully logged. But nothing could stop the activity. If anything, it intensified. Lee noticed that during busy days, when more male energy passed through the room, the nights were more volatile. Fire alarms would trip, objects would be displaced. The doll's case once shifted 2 inches forward on the display shelf overnight, despite being on a non-sloped, vibration-free surface. The attacks too began escalating. The live stream was only the beginning. By late summer of 2024, the name Elizabeth was being whispered by investigators, whispered by visitors, and scrawled across social media platforms. The haunted bridal doll had crossed the threshold. What began as a curious eBay acquisition had now become a national and soon international paranormal phenomenon. Her behavior was consistent, targeted, and now statistically undeniable. At least 17 men had reported experiencing unexplained physical harm in the doll's presence. Each story had its own details, but the pattern was always the same. The injuries varied in nature, but shared common traits: scratches. Most victims reported long, thin abrasions on their back, shoulders, or neck. Often, a male visitor would feel a sudden heat or pain while standing near the doll. Several described feeling invisible fingers tugging at their hair or clothing, and a handful of men were so affected that they had to leave the museum altogether, complaining of dizziness and nausea. The attacks happened in plain daylight, under camera surveillance, and often with multiple witnesses present. None of the injured had touched the doll. Some hadn't even spoken aloud in the room, and the vast majority were skeptics, people who entered laughing, mocking, or challenging the doll's supposed powers. They didn't leave laughing. The 17th documented victim was a middle-aged man from Nottingham who had visited the museum during a weekend tour. His wife was a fan of the paranormal, but he had no interest. He had spent most of the tour making quiet jokes, calling Elizabeth a prop, a fake, and just a doll. In the bridal room, he stood beside the display for less than 3 minutes before wincing. He told Sarah, who was leading the tour, that his neck hurt. By the time they stepped into the hallway, his wife gasped. 3 distinct, raised claw marks were visible across his neck and upper back. The man hadn't touched anything. He hadn't leaned against a surface or rubbed his skin, and the marks were fresh and deep. When he was shown photos of similar injuries experienced by others, he turned pale. He didn't speak again for the rest of the tour. His wife later sent an email to the museum. In it, she said, "He's never believed in any of this. He won't even say her name out loud anymore." As events continued to unfold, Lee and Sarah documented each case meticulously. They took high-resolution photographs of every injury. In many instances, they interviewed the victims within several minutes of the event, capturing first-hand reactions while the physical marks were still present. Some of the wounds healed quickly, fading within hours. Others lingered. Several of the scratches followed a parallel pattern, thin and deliberate, as if from fingernails. Others appeared jagged or chaotic, resembling symbols or sigils, particularly when the victims had taunted or insulted the doll. One of the most disturbing marks resembled a crooked triangle, a shape often associated in occult circles with binding or vengeance. Each incident was reviewed by staff. Video footage was cross-referenced. None of the victims had been alone. In some cases, the attacks occurred live on stream. The evidence was overwhelming. Continuing with the pattern, not a single woman had ever been harmed by the doll. Sarah had worked in the bridal room for hours, both with and without Lee. She had never once been scratched. Other female guests reported discomfort, headaches, or anxiety, but never physical contact. This gender-specific aggression wasn't merely a coincidence. It suggested intention. Theories began circulating. Was Elizabeth the spirit of a betrayed bride? A woman murdered on her wedding day? Or was she something older, darker? An entity that had chosen a doll as its vessel and fed on the emotional energy of fear and anger, particularly from men. No one could say for sure, but Elizabeth was gaining power, and the museum had become a stage. By the time the museum documented its 17th male victim, it was clear that Elizabeth's presence extended far beyond subtle chills or passive aggression. The injuries were real. The whispers were audible, and now objects began to move. As the summer of 2024 gave way to early autumn, the doll's activity escalated from personal attacks to classic poltergeist phenomena, the kind of violent, unpredictable movement of objects that had for decades marked only the most extreme hauntings. One of the first major displays of Elizabeth's physical power occurred during a routine walkthrough of the museum. Sarah Carter had been alone, tidying up displays while preparing for a weekend event. As she entered the bridal room, a glass perfume bottle, which had rested undisturbed for weeks, launched itself across the room. Sarah described it later in detail. It didn't fall, it didn't slide. It lifted and hurled through the air. I saw it move with a force that didn't make sense. It didn't just drop. It was thrown at the wall. The bottle struck the opposite side of the room with enough velocity to shatter on impact. The scent clung to the air like a warning. There was no wind, no structural vibration, and no one else present. The footage from the overhead surveillance camera showed the object leaving the shelf and sailing in a horizontal arc, not dropping downward. It was proof, not just of energy, but of directional force. Something had aimed it. After the bottle incident, the museum began experiencing electronic disturbances, especially near the bridal room. Motion sensors would blink rapidly, indicating movement when the room was empty. Cameras set to infrared would sometimes black out, showing only static or sudden white flares of light. Batteries and recorders and handheld devices that were fully charged would inexplicably drain within a few minutes of entering the room. During one live stream, a simple digital word generator, a device commonly used by investigators to measure energy fluctuations and produce corresponding words, flashed two messages in quick succession. Those were bride and haunting. Lee and Sarah later confirmed that neither had entered the word bank manually. The device had never produced those words before. The moment was captured live, with thousands watching it happen in real time. It seemed to be one of the most direct messages yet. Another troubling incident occurred late one evening as Lee reviewed security footage. At approximately 3:38 a.m., the surveillance camera in the bridal room recorded something subtle but unmistakable. Elizabeth's glass case shifted. There was no one in the building. No seismic activity had been recorded in the area. And yet on camera, the heavy plexiglass display case moved forward nearly 2 inches. There was no vibration, no imbalance. The floor was solid concrete. The next morning, Sarah noticed it first. The case is off-center, she said. It was flush with the edge yesterday. Reviewing the footage confirmed it. The case hadn't fallen or been struck. It had slid with deliberate control toward the center of the room, as if further seeking attention, as if Elizabeth wanted to be closer. By now, the fire alarm phenomena had become so frequent that the system had to be temporarily deactivated during certain hours. Always the same zone, and always around 3 a.m. In tandem with these events, the emergency lighting system malfunctioned twice in September, plunging the bridal room into total darkness. Electricians could find no wiring issues. Paranormal teams brought in electromagnetic frequency detectors, or EMF, which routinely spiked near Elizabeth's case, far beyond typical background levels. Every attempt to isolate a natural cause was seeming to fail. During one particularly active week, Sarah placed a motion-activated digital recorder near the doll for a 48-hour test period. On playback, the most common sounds were soft taps, 3 taps in a row, repeating several times. But at 4:12 a.m. on the second night, a voice broke through. Not a whisper, but a voice. One that was female, clear, and sharp. It said, "Why did he lie?" Those 4 words were isolated and looped and reviewed by multiple investigators. No radio signals interfered. No background sounds could be attributed. There was no logical explanation. Some would later suggest the voice was residual energy, an echo from a traumatic event. Others believed that it was the entity speaking directly. By October, staff members, especially male employees, began reporting something new: the feeling of being watched outside of the bridal room. One man claimed to see Elizabeth's reflection move independently of her posture inside the case. Another described seeing her veil flutter despite the absence of airflow. One even claimed that her eyes had shifted direction overnight. A photo comparison showed a subtle but disturbing difference. The gaze had moved slightly left. These events were not confirmed scientifically, but they added to the growing fear. Elizabeth was no longer content to simply sit behind glass. She wanted out. The doll had a name now, though no written tag accompanied her when she arrived, and no official documentation had ever identified her as such. The staff and visitors began calling her Elizabeth. The name emerged organically, as though whispered collectively and unprompted. Some claimed they simply felt that it was her name. Others said it was the only word that came to mind when standing near her. And so, Elizabeth, she became. But just who or what was Elizabeth? What spirit or force now occupied the worn porcelain shell of a Victorian bridal doll? Theories abounded. None could be proven, but taken together, they painted a picture more disturbing than anyone had expected. The most commonly circulated explanation was the most human. Elizabeth had once been a living woman, possibly from the late 19th or early 20th century, a young bride, one that was wronged and betrayed. Her behavior, particularly her aggression towards men, suggested personal trauma. Some guests who had spoken aloud to her claimed to hear tapping in response, but only if they asked emotionally charged questions, such as, "Did he hurt you? Were you left at the altar? Was it your wedding day?" While the doll had never spoken her origin aloud, patterns and behavior supported the idea of heartbreak, vengeance, and a gender-specific trauma. The fact that no woman had ever been scratched, burned, or otherwise harmed by Elizabeth was difficult to ignore. If the spirit attached to the doll was indeed that of a betrayed bride, she was reliving her fury, and every man who entered the room was a potential stand-in for the one who had wronged her. Another, less personal theory suggested that the doll may have become a vessel for displaced grief. Historically, dolls have been used as mourning objects, gifts to children after the death of a sibling, or keepsakes buried with the deceased. Some researchers in the paranormal field theorize that extreme grief, particularly sudden and violent loss, can act as a magnet for spiritual energy. If the doll had once belonged to a woman who died tragically, perhaps on or near her wedding day, it's possible that the energy remained, gradually growing stronger as the doll passed from one home to another. Several owners, according to the original eBay listing, had returned the doll in haste after experiencing disturbing energy, including visions, oppressive moods, and physical attacks. Notably, all owners were male. The timeline of ownership was never fully disclosed, but it was confirmed by the seller and leaseer that multiple men had indeed returned the doll in fear and some within days. Whatever her origin, the force within Elizabeth was consistent in its hostility. A more ominous possibility has been floated by several investigators, including Lee himself. Could Elizabeth be a host to a non-human spirit? Demonology teaches that certain malevolent entities can mimic the behavior of ghosts, adopting personas, names, or emotional triggers to gain attention or energy from their hosts. Over time, their behavior becomes more violent, manipulative, and dangerous. The pentagram-like scratch that appeared on Lee's back during an early encounter raised concerns. While pentagrams are not inherently satanic, their misuse or sudden appearance during a haunting is often interpreted as a sign of spiritual deception or darker forces. Other signs too support this theory. Objects being thrown across the room, dramatic temperature fluctuations, fire alarms triggering at precise hours, voice recordings that include cryptic, disturbing phrases, and attacks that seem to escalate with attention. It is known that Elizabeth's aggression intensified after the doll began gaining popularity online. The more views, comments, and reactions that she garnered, the more incidents occurred in the museum. Could the entity be feeding off the energy of fear and fascination? And if so, was it always there, or had something darker found its way in? To this day, no definitive identity has been confirmed for Elizabeth. No registry, no birth record, no violent death tied to the doll's specific form has ever been uncovered. But those who've encountered her rarely leave unaffected, and those who mock her often regret it. Whether she was a grieving woman, an angry bride, or something far older and darker, the entity known as Elizabeth has made her purpose clear. She was not finished. She was only just beginning. By the first half of 2025, Elizabeth had become a contender as one of the most infamous haunted objects in the world. No longer an obscure eBay curiosity, the doll had risen to full-blown notoriety through hundreds of thousands of views across TikTok, YouTube, Instagram, and paranormal forums. Journalists from major outlets began covering her story. She was featured in articles across the UK, India, and the US, often accompanied by headlines branding her as the world's most haunted doll, the bridal doll that hates men, and a possessed relic that's left 17 men injured. And all the while, she sat in her case in the Haunted Objects Museum in Rotterdam, completely still, entirely silent, and somehow more alive than ever. The museum remained open to the public, though it operated under stricter protocols when it came to Elizabeth. A formal warning sign was posted at the entrance of the bridal room. This exhibit includes a haunted bridal doll associated with numerous unexplained injuries to male visitors. Physical contact is prohibited. Enter at your own risk. The museum also implemented a gender-based advisory. Male visitors were advised to keep a distance from the display. Some were required to sign a disclaimer if they wished to enter the bridal room during solo investigations or live stream events. Tour guides, including Lee himself, began avoiding long stays in the room, especially when alone. The bridal display case remained secured behind plexiglass. Motion sensors and infrared cameras were installed permanently, recording around the clock. The system logged countless anomalous events, temperature shifts, light fluctuations, and the most unsettling of all, the movement of the case itself. Elizabeth, it seemed, continued to shift inside her display, even when untouched. Though most of the documented attacks occurred in 2024, new incidents continued into 2025. Male visitor number 18 entered the bridal room in early January, a university student visiting from Birmingham. He had heard of Elizabeth online and wanted to see what the hype was about. Within 10 minutes, he felt a sharp pain in his ribs. He lifted his shirt in the hallway, revealing 3 thin, bloody scratches that were carved into his side. Security footage showed he had not touched anything. No sharp surfaces were nearby. He had been alone in the room, except for the doll. He declined medical attention but left the museum immediately. His only words on the way out were, "She did it." A few weeks later, a staff member newly hired reported his ID badge being pulled off his neck and flung to the door while adjusting lighting in the room. He would quit 3 days later. To this day, the staff logs each new experience, and the list continues to grow. Elizabeth's reputation became a draw in its own right. Visitors flocked from across the UK to see her. Lee and Sarah were invited to speak at conventions and online panels, and Elizabeth was always the centerpiece of the discussion. "She's unlike anything else in the museum," Sarah said in 2025 during an interview. "Most haunted items, they act once, maybe twice, then go dormant. Elizabeth is consistent. She's deliberate." The doll's presence also inspired a surge in spiritual interests. Mediums, demonologists, and psychics requested private sessions to read the energy around her. Some claimed she contained not one, but multiple entities, a blend of human grief and something far darker. One psychic, after spending 6 minutes near her case, abruptly left the museum and refused to return. She later wrote in a private message that, "There's a woman in that doll, but there's something else, something behind her." As of now, Elizabeth remains behind plexiglass still within the museum. No cleansing rituals have been attempted. Lee and Sarah fear provoking her. No spiritual medium has suggested moving her, and no one, not even skeptics, have attempted to remove her from the building. She is considered the museum's most dangerous item, not because of what she says or how she looks, but because of what she does, consistently, quietly, and without warning. Elizabeth doesn't need to scream. She doesn't need to cry. And really, she doesn't even need to move. Her silence is enough. And for those who dare to question her power, she's always just watching. Elizabeth seems to represent a rare type of haunting, not simply a residual energy bound to an object, but a conscious and reactive force, one that responds to attention, targets specific victims, and behaves with recognizable patterns. For investigators and researchers in the field, she is considered a case study in intelligent haunting behavior. Her consistency, visibility, and repeatable phenomena have made her one of the few haunted objects to offer real-time, publicly viewable activity. Elizabeth has also forced some skeptics to reevaluate the limits of their belief. While no scientific body has confirmed the paranormal origin of the phenomena surrounding her, the sheer volume of documentation makes her difficult to ignore. She may not prove the existence of spirits, but she certainly challenges the idea that all haunted stories are made up. Also, as of today, visitors who enter the bridal room report feeling a pressure as if the air itself tightens. Some continue to feel watched. Others describe hearing distant whispers, always just behind them. Men especially describe a heat on their backs, like breath or fingertips. And every few months, without warning, someone new is scratched. As Sarah Carter once said, "You can walk past dozens of haunted objects in our collection and feel nothing. But when you stand in front of Elizabeth, it's different. You feel her. She knows you're there. A tourist from Germany visited the museum in the late spring of this year. He spoke little English and understood even less of the doll's backstory. He entered the bridal room with a small group and took a photo of the doll and quietly exited. That night, while reviewing the image in his hotel room, he noticed something strange. Behind the glass, through the veil, there was another face, not the doll's, and not his reflection. It was that of a woman. Her eyes were dark. Her mouth was open, and it was watching him. He decided to delete the photo and couldn't sleep for the rest of the night. When he returned home, he mailed the museum a note. Only 3 words were handwritten in German on the postcard. Sie lebt noch. She is still alive. Thank you guys so very much for watching this new video. I did want to ask you, what are your thoughts on Elizabeth as a whole? Do you think that it's a demonic haunting, or is it a human spirit that's inhabiting the doll? Or is the doll even possessed at all? Definitely let me know down in the comments below. If you liked this video, and I hope you did, please like the video, subscribe, and leave a comment down below. You can also consider grabbing yourself one of my awesome new shirts or blankets, or even a copy of my book from mysteryarchives.myshopify.com. Or you can support my work by clicking join now here on YouTube, or by visiting patreon.com/mysteryarchives to become a channel member, gain access to all my content ad-free, plus extra content. I do apologize, guys. Again, these videos take me a good while to create, but they are labor of love, and I've mentioned this before in the past, but I certainly don't take your patience or support for granted. So I truly appreciate all of you guys and this incredible community. Anyways, this has been Cody here at Mystery Archives. Remember to stay safe out there, physically and spiritually, and definitely from Elizabeth. And I'll see you next time. Until then, watch one of my other videos popping up now, or check out one of these playlists. And take care.